have a clicker here somewhere. Pockets. Too many things in a pocket. You need to keep your hands out of my pocket. It occurred to me at the end of last week's discussion. Let me go through this. Earlier in the week, I was reading Dr. Hammond's post where he was exhorting us to study history. And this was his quote. He says, the longer you look back, the further you can look forward, and a tall building needs to lay deep foundations. A tall tree needs a deep root system. In order to understand who we are, we need to understand where we came from. We need to understand the events, the issues of the past that correspond with our challenges today. In order to anticipate problems and threats in the future, we need to study the past. We need to liberate our thinking from current fashions and recognize potential potholes and traps. There are immeasurable insights and practical help to be gained from studying the people, events, and issues that shape the past and affect our present situation. This phrase, we need to liberate our thinking from current fashions, it occurred to me, has a great deal to do with our study in debt. I was thinking, as I was driving home from Sunday school last week, that a lot of what we discuss in this class, especially on the debt, has been, how do I get around what the Bible is saying about debt? I'm not saying debt's a sin. We will talk about that extensively today. But how much of what we're doing is trying to get around what the Bible says? And so I just wanted to kind of frame our minds, frame our discussion with that thought today. So as we wade into debt once again, one of the things that we need to talk about is how long. We've talked about debt is an instrument of conquest, that the lender is the head and the borrower is the tail. We've talked about all those kinds of things. But we need to examine this idea. If debt's not a sin or it can go into debt, then how long is prudent? And the main clue seems to be found in the Sabbath laws of debt forgiveness. The charitable loans were allowed and even encouraged from the wealthy to the poor, the deserving poor, but keeping in mind that the borrower was supposed to pay it back. Now we're talking about loans between covenant keepers on both ends of this deal. The wealthy covenant keeper and the poor covenant keeper. So we have a situation where there are parameters about debt that are laid out in the Bible. How do we lend and how do we borrow from one another? Since the Sabbath release from debts was every 7 years, it seems that we can say that debts were expected to be repaid by God's covenant people within that time frame. If it was either on the part of the wealthy to withhold lending in anticipation of an upcoming Sabbath release, it would be equally wicked for the poor man to borrow in that same anticipation. So we see here, right, both of these, the wealthy and the poor, the lender and the borrower, were being expected to either pay or be repaid within 7 years. The wealthy was expected to forgive that debt to the covenant keeper, the poor, the deserving poor, within that 7 years. So we think about this Sabbath law in terms of the forgiveness, not about if we're the forgived, if we're the forgiven. But we're also expected to pay that thing back. So if what we're seeing here is a biblical prescription for how to borrow, the poor man was to borrow, but he was also supposed to pay back, That previous verse, Psalms 37:21, the wicked borrows and does not pay back. Says it's a sin to borrow and not pay it back. But, we're dealing here with that 7-year period. So, we seem to be setting up a precedent, a principle, that we should be paying our debts within 7 years' time. Now, that's the way I read it. I'm open to other suggestions on this, but in the context, the broader context of what we've been talking about with debt, that it's the lender who's the head and the borrower who's the tail, and all the ideas of conquering through debt, it seems like 7 years is a biblical principle that's laid out for us, not hard and fast, but it seems a biblical principle for a period of time. Conrad.
I guess 2 questions. One would be, it's been a while since I read these laws, but do you think that they applied to commercial loans as well as charitable loans, or just charitable loans? And then also, in the way this would have worked, almost no loan would have been 7 years. It would have been 6.5 or 6.
Yeah, exactly, because there was a set Sabbath year, and there was that, it was the same for every.
So if God's goal would have been to make it 7, why wouldn't he just say, every loan must be forgiven in the 7th year?
And that's what we want to discuss. Those are great questions. I think in terms of commercial as well, I think that as a principle, 7 years is kind of a thing. And we're going to talk about this as we get to the end, about the purposes of borrowing and what we intend to accomplish by our borrowing in a commercial sense.
Do you think Israel applied them to commercial loans? Just in terms of the text itself?
I think it's quiet. I don't think it says. I don't think it
doesn't distinguish between commercial and private, does it?
Well, except that in this sense, Dave, what we're talking about in this context, we're talking about the poor loans, the charitable loans that you would not charge usury on. That's mostly what's been talked about. That's mostly what the Bible talks about. With the assumption too that there's not a lot of borrowing going on. That just would appear to be the case. Of course, there were no taxes, and so in familial business, it'd be relatively easy as things may have been back before we had electricity and all the productive tools that we have today. But the family-built businesses, and it was generational kinds of things. And imagine how easy it would be today to accumulate money if you weren't taxed. If you could pass your money through without inheritance, those kinds of things. That was all happening then. You were leaving an inheritance, and God was blessing as the Israelites were obedient. Now, what do we make of the silence about commercial loans? I think that there's a great deal of liberty that we have as Christians. But in principle, I think that we're talking, in general, 7 years is the kind of loans that make sense from a biblical standpoint. The poor were expected to pay those loans back. The periods of time that were the max were 7 years.
The struggle with that is our society is built on a commercial 20-year and residential 30-year.
Yeah.
And then prices of property and goods
Change accordingly
tied
to that
to
expectation.
what you can pay
Yes.
in a 20-year span. And so if you want to pay for something in 7 years, which equipment, a vehicle, you should be able to, a property is just almost out of your reach.
I agree. I mean, it is because of the way things are priced.
Right? Exactly.
There was a time before the Depression in this country when if people borrowed it off for a home, they did pay it off in 6 years. That was the average kind of time that people borrowed for in this country, but we're not living then. There's also, go ahead, Dave.
No, I just keep my mouth shut because this is a long rabbit trail.
Well, it is a rabbit trail, but it's important that we understand it. In what sense is rent not a debt? If we sign a one-year lease, are we not in debt? We are. And if you're going to be continually paying rent, you're going to be continually in debt. Is there a case to be made for getting into a mortgage, at which point you can get out of debt?
But not in 7 years.
But not in 7 years, or maybe in 7 years, depending on how you do it. Just to discuss our own circumstances, when Beth and I bought our house, I was 59 years old when we settled in that house, and I got a 30-year mortgage. I'm going to be 89 to pay it off. I asked the bank officer, are you out of your mind? What's wrong with you? And he said, I can't discriminate. It's just that the law says I'm not allowed to discriminate. If you can afford this mortgage today, I have to give you this mortgage today. But our plan was, and we knew this, is that Amy and Sid were going to be living with us. Well, now, they pay us rent. At this moment, it's just Beth's and my name on the mortgage. Amy and Sid pay us rent, and we take that rent every month, that rent, and put it to the mortgage. So we are hammering that mortgage. We don't think we'll get it paid in 7 years, but we'll have it paid in 10 out of the 30 because we're just banging away on the principal. And they're paying less rent than what they would pay for equivalent space if they were out paying somebody rent. That's a family situation that really lent itself to this particular debt. Jeremiah, you had a question?
I've always thought another thing to add to the discussion in terms of the fact that it's a challenge to try to operate with minimum debt is I think that a lot of this, and you already mentioned it, assumes a vision of inheritance. So I guess the assumption would be that let's say the next generation may have a significant inheritance to operate from, so they wouldn't need to use debt to move forward.
Yes.
So if we're trying to be more like a generation that's kind of trying to start things fresh, we don't have that advantage, so it can take a while to build that into our family, 2 or 3 generations down the road.
I think that's a fair point, and I think that's something that I was going to try to get to, but let's talk about it now. We can come up with this vision, this view of debts, and say, you know what, we're not there, but we want to get there, and we want to leave this to our children. You want to leave that to Mary and Caleb and the kids, as down the line.
Some people, I'm not saying none, I'm just saying myself. I'm sure there's plenty of families that are thinking this way and are, on this track.
Let's think in terms generationally. Let's think long term and say, okay, I'm not going to be that guy that can get out of debt in 7 years. I'm not going to be the one. But my kids might be the ones because of how I'm approaching it now. That you are aiming at an inheritance that would allow that. We instead of thinking just for today, we think that long term. Yeah, and that's a fair thing. That's a fair plan, I believe. So anyway, I can't find any other principle but the 7-year in Scripture. Conrad's point is a good one. That Sabbath thing was a set year that didn't move. It's not like he said, only go to debt for 7 years and let that roll. It was a set year. But it also, I think, in that over covenant situation was pointing out the principle. It was really teaching the principle that that debts would be forgiven at a set point. Could he have done it the other way? Certainly. Can we apply it this way? Am I taking liberty by saying 7 years on a rolling basis, 7 years from when we engage in the debt?
If you were on the other end of it, when you were lending money to somebody, would you go by the 7-year principle?
I would have that discussion. I would see.
Forget it.
I think you'd be a lot more careful about who you would loan to.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, didn't you do a sermon series on this?
Deer in the headlights.
Pastor Weaver did it.
No, it was, well, Pastor Weaver is arguing on this subject. But,
Yes.
okay.
Well, I gotta be careful when I put this down. Keeping my coffee hot, but it's gonna melt my plastic. Yeah. It's a hot light. Yeah. I would be very careful about lending more than 7 years. I would. It would have to be an extraordinary circumstance, and I'd have to understand what was being attempted. If it was kind of in the family, and I saw it as a way of passing an inheritance through, and if I saw it as a way of avoiding the ungodly inheritance taxation, if there was some way to do that, I might use the system against itself in order to pass the inheritance through, even though it would be called debt. I don't know if you can get around that, but I would look at it. I certainly would. If it was commercial, probably not. Piece of equipment, like we talked about, you should be able to pay off the equipment in 7 years. Consumption, probably not. Probably not any term, if it was for consumption. Have to be for a business purpose or a residence or something along those lines. Yeah, Jeremiah.
So then, I mean, this would influence your priority in terms of how you would allocate your money. I mean, if you have debt, it would be a priority to pay that off first before you would maybe invest that money. I mean, if you have, let's say you have an extra $1,000 a month, but you have still have balance on your mortgage, you would say the priority would be to pay that mortgage down in terms as opposed to taking $1,000 a month.
That's the way I would approach it.
Put it
Yes.
into an IRA.
Was that?
And put it into an IRA.
Put what into the
So
IRA?
if you had an extra $1,000 at the end of the month, you're saying you would put that toward your debt and not into an IRA or something?
I probably would, yes. That's the way I would approach it. Because I fear debt. And I think the Bible gives us plenty of warrant to fear debt. But that's, that indeed is. We could, for instance, take the rent that Annie and Sid are paying us, the quote-unquote rent, and put it to other things. And we have from time to time, if the heater goes bad in the house, and we don't have the scratch to just, pay the heater, then we may take that rent that month and fix the heater. We all want to be warm in the wintertime. But as a general rule, yes, we are taking and just plugging everything we can against the debt. Joel?
Yeah, plus, let's say you have a fixed mortgage of 3.5%.
Yes?
So you don't pay it on the mortgage, which is costing 3.5%. You put it in an IRA. Well, that's a bad year in the market, and you don't get that 3.5% back anyway. So I mean, it's just, now that's a real bad decision.
Or you might get 20%. I would be happy you did.
Yeah, but it's that borrowing on the future thing again.
That's it.
It's that.
Your debt at 3.5% is certain. Your return at something else is uncertain.
Yeah. Last 10 years have been pretty good, but 08, 09 wasn't so hot.
Yeah, if you lived through 08 and 09, yeah. But that's kind of where we are. You take a look at that and say, whoa, from 95 to 2000 was great. But if I lived for, if I was in the market from 2000 to 2003, it wiped it all out. And then I got it all back to 2007, and then I gave it all back. It was up and down, up and down.
But the difficult part is if we are in debt, and if we are, so yes, okay, so we try to get out of it, you can really get bogged down in the weeds pretty fast. If you're like, if you take a firm position that, sin is debt, or debt is sin, and that some people have, or you take a position that, how far are you gonna take it? Like, okay, so I can't drive to the beach because I'm in debt. Like, when are you gonna stop with that? I cannot go on vacation because I am currently in debt, or I cannot do this, or I cannot do that. Like, where is it? I'm just saying.
I know, and everybody's going to have to wrestle with that. The point of this is not to come up with a hard and fast rule. I am not going to stand here and say that debt is sin. The Bible doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. But it also doesn't have anything good to say about it. I think it recognizes it as something that will happen from time to time, and that it's a tool, like a lot of other tools, that could be used for good and evil. It could be used or abused. And accordingly, we have to be very, very careful about it. So, that's been the point of this discussion on debt. So let's get out of the, let's see, we've already touched on about not knowing the future. That's something we talked about before, is that we presume on the future. We presume we have a future when we take on debt. How long will we have a job? How long, if there's a depression, deflation, inflation, what if I die? Am I obligating my family? Those are considerations that we have to take, things that we have to take into consideration. Many plans are in a man's heart, but the counsel of the Lord will stand. So it's the same thing as what James was saying. So we come to our conclusion to kind of wrap up our discussion on debt after several weeks of this. The Bible does warn us against debt. In both the Old and New Testaments, it's to be limited. There's this impression that the Old Testament was more rigorous about debt than the New Testament. I don't think it's the case. The Testaments are never in conflict. All right? They're never pitting one against the other. I think that the impression is because of the success of the reformers, especially Calvin, who released the Western economies from the strict injunctions the church had against interest. The Third Lateran Council of 1179 said that interest is usury. And so there was this Middle Ages mentality, said all debt is sin. And to go into debt and to charge interest or to pay interest, it's all bad. It's all bad. And Calvin really, his examination really changed that. Reformers stressed that all of life was to be lived under God's laws, not the unbiblical laws pronounced by a corrupt church. Third Lateran Council, for instance. Usury was again defined as collecting interest on charitable loans, and commercial interest was allowed. Calvin's Institutes of the Law, and we'll see some of these things at the end here, last slides. He said that interest was legitimate, and that helped to finance the growth of economies. It did. There's no question that credit, debt greases the wheels. It greases the wheels of economies. But the New Testament might have a far more strict standard about debt. Does it ban debt for the believer? Owe nothing to anyone, it says, except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. All right? A lot of people take this to mean we should have no debt. And is that fair? There are supporting New Testament verses. You can't serve God and money. In Colossians 3, it talks about greed, which amounts to idolatry. We talked already about the unjust steward, where we were handing him over to torturers until he should repay all that was owed him, right? So, do we think that the New Testament bans debt? Now, I've already tipped my hand on this, but there are people who will take this very, very hard line and say debt is sin, based on these verses. So we want to be aware of that. We need to be aware of it. But I don't think it holds. Does anybody want to disagree? Okay, good. We are supposed to maintain our position as free people free to serve God. Sometimes when we get into debt, we're not free to do that. We're not free to take the vacation day. We're not free to help somebody out with a move, or to go on a mission, or to help our neighbors because we're in debt. So we need to be able to try to serve God as wholeheartedly as possible, and sometimes debt will impinge that ability. Inflationary and debt-laden societies say much about what the society values. In the inflation and debt cycles, it's not the thrifty who flourish. Remember, we talked about that before. Your savings are eroded and actually wasted by inflation. So the thrifty, people who save money, save cash, are punished in inflation. And spending becomes personal and political virtue. I don't know if anybody remembers, but in the crisis, the financial crisis, we were encouraged to go out and buy an SUV. It's a patriotic thing to do. That's crazy. Go in debt. Spend your money. Get the consumption, and you read it, and there's this assumption in the newspapers and the magazines and everything you read. It's pronounced that our economy is based on, like 80% of our economy is based on consumption. And they say that like it's a good thing. And so consumption is measured very carefully on a monthly and quarterly basis to say, oh, okay, people are spending, so the economy is going to be good. Spending on what? Smoky Bones and McDonald's and what? Consumption. That's not necessarily a good thing. It's not productive. Yes?
So the reason why you say that thrifty people become impoverished is inflation?
Inflation impoverishes thrifty people, yes, because of what they save, if they're trying to save their money. We've talked about that in previous class when we were talking about money and inflation, that if you save in things, you may not be as impoverished. But inflation still hurts everybody, because everybody has some level of cash, everybody has some level of money, and everything then becomes a gamble. Did what I buy, instead of saving it in money, I'm saving it in toilet paper, right? Well, the toilet paper, it's going to maintain its utility, and so it'll maintain its value. But maybe I saved it in modern art. It's right. Instead of saving my money in a CD, I bought a piece of modern art, and maybe I guessed wrong. And people finally woke up and said, wait, that's horrible. I don't want that. And so, but it forces you to start to gamble. When you don't have a steady valuation on your money, and you don't have a steady store of value that you can rely upon, then you're forced to gamble on what will store my value. Will the art, will the antiques, will gold, will silver? Those tend to be okay, because gold and silver have tended over all these years to be okay. We have 5,000 year history with gold and silver. Modern art is a relatively, dare I say, modern phenomenon. There are classic, I know, I had to say it. Classic art may be better, but who can afford the multi-millions that go into Rembrandts or that kind of thing. The land has proven to be a relatively steady value, but even that, you're gambling because of the location. So that's my point about inflation, is it impoverishes those who try to save in money, and it puts everybody else at risk because you're gambling about how to store your value. So, Bible's clear that debt makes us a slave to the lender, and that's a violation of the biblical command, you were bought with a price, don't become slaves of men. So, it's clear that we are slaves to the lender. Is it necessarily a sin? Well, the Bible doesn't actually say that. It's for freedom that Christ set us free, and not for debt servitude to others. Here are some principles regarding the debt. The Bible doesn't prohibit the debt. Still, when it's mentioned, it's always mentioned negatively, except in those cases where it actually encourages us to lend to our deserving brethren. Mostly, the debt is condemned because it makes us a servant to someone besides God, and that's always bad. And the hierarchy that we talk about all the time it's pretty flat. Right? There's God and everybody else. That's the hierarchy. And what we do is we've got God, everybody else, and then the lenders are in between. So that's not good. If we do borrow, we have to pay it all back. I used the example of somebody I know who borrowed on his credit cards to finance his college education because credit card debt is something that he could declare bankruptcy on, as opposed to student debt, which you can never get out of. He was smart enough to recognize the difference, financed his college education with the intention of being bankrupt when he was done, did that, cleared his decks, and
Was that a economist?
no. He's a relative by marriage.
What was his profession? Like,
He counsels children.
oh,
All right? He's a child psychologist, believe it or not, all right? You want these people teaching our kids. But he figured, it was clear to him, hey, you can't get out of a student debt. They follow you forever. And so he went with the intention. If we do borrow, you got to pay it back. It's a sin to borrow. It's no different than stealing. Shaq.
I have a question about that, and when you get a credit card, you sign a contract. Essentially, it's a contract telling you what, if
What terms
you
are?
pay this is with interest, if
Yep.
it stays this long. So when does I'm signing a contract, maybe it's their fault that that's their system. Maybe the fault is in the system itself, because when I sign a contract, if I sign a lease, both me and the landlord, we are bound to that contract,
You are. Correct.
And so we agree to that. And in the case of a credit card, we are bound by the rules that they set,
Yes.
and we're agreeing to that.
Correct.
I didn't break any of their rules either,
Right.
They know that, and they know most of those guys, they lose plenty of money on people not paying.
Sure.
They lose plenty, but they understand that risk.
They
So,
do.
when I sign a contract, where's the,
What's the difference? Why that can be discharged in bankruptcy as opposed to a student loan?
why is it, where's the moral, I get the moral dilemma, but is it if I'm signing a contract? And they understand the risks?
But you're promising to pay it back when you sign that,
Yes.
Well, I'm promising to abide by the rules of the contract.
which
I'm
means
not
always
promising-
making your minimum payments.
Right, but if I can't pay the minimum payments,
You're
if I
breaking your word.
cannot,
You're breaking your word.
no, that's not. If I sign a contract saying that if I cannot pay, interest will accrue. This is what I'm saying. Listen, I'm gonna pay if I can. If I cannot pay, interest will accrue, right or wrong, and that's benefiting them if I cannot pay. So I'm still within the contract when I don't pay? Is that something wrong I'm doing? Is it something wrong with their system? That is a broken system, you know, from
Agreed.
their
I
end.
think that the intention is that you're going to borrow it and pay it back.
Right.
Everybody understands that. It's that the intention. What you're saying is if I abide by the rules that say I don't necessarily have to pay it back, I can just let the interest accrue, am I in
Right.
sin?
Yeah, what if I say I'm gonna pay it back in, you know, I'll pay it back in 50 years? I'll pay it back.
You're borrowing on the future.
Yeah, but I'll pay it back.
Right.
It's,
But
you're
you're
still the
still,
same thing when you get a
you're
mortgage.
still violating the intent of,
Don't you still agree, though, to make your minimum payment, like Ryan was saying?
yeah, I believe you do.
Yeah, but within the contract, you don't have to. Within their contract, we understand that if you are not able to pay, there is nothing within we can't do anything legally, anything, and we still want you to sign the contract and say, you know, now most people won't do that because, to be honest with you, most people don't know. A lot of people don't know that it's not a unsecured loan. You know, they probably don't know that, and so they pay. But if people start finding out, like, you kidding me? I don't even have to pay this, and after, listen,
That's
after
not
a
the
case.
case. I don't have to pay, you're saying I don't have to pay it now.
Right, I'm saying, listen, I'll pay
It's
it.
worth the pay. Right?
No, not for a credit card, it's an unsecured loan, meaning there is nothing they can do to make you pay it, nothing. They can't, yeah, that is the meaning of an unsecured loan. Like, a mortgage is a secured loan, because they have collateral there, which is, they
We're
get
going
your
to talk
house.
about that in a minute.
You know,
Right.
that's a secured loan.
I understand that when you deposit money in the bank, you're making them an unsecured loan.
Right, yeah, true.
They don't have to pay it back.
And the mortgage, if they decide that they want all the money for your house tomorrow, they're allowed to say, we want the debt that we gave you, we want it right now, and if you can't pay the principal right now, they can take your home. Now,
No, I don't think that's true.
that's within the contract of a mortgage.
No,
No, not just that.
they
Not,
can't
not,
change the terms.
not just like
30
that.
years, set for 30 years, they can't.
You have covenants that you have to have violated.
Even if within, I've read somewhere that within the small print, that if there are in some cases where they
Some
can
commercial
actually.
loans are written that way, and lines of credit are often, but I
Right.
don't think.
Well, line of credit is-
Well,
And
yeah,
that-
that's a rabbit trail, I guess. I've read somewhere that they have ways to kind of, if they need the money, but.
So, Shaq, are you arguing?
Contracts.
Okay,
Let me-
but what are you arguing for?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Why is, yeah, I'm just arguing that within, what's the point of a contract then? If me and you have a contract, why would I write up a contract if the rules are the rules? You know, this contract is just for, you know,
Quick thought. So it sounds to me like what you're arguing is if you can get away with something lawfully, is it wrong? But in coming from the construction world, you can legally steal millions of dollars. I've seen companies do it, signing it, and then they hire their lawyers, they don't perform, they sue them for this, they sue them for that. And they can do it all by law. They can run out this, pay themselves out, they can take that company bankrupt. The question has to become, following the principles of Scripture, if you obviously know purchasing something with someone's credit card, trying to get around it by their own contract is a sin. I mean, that's as clear to me
It's
as
deceptive.
deceptive, it's, the intent.
what if I can't pay it? My question is, what if I cannot pay it?
That's what bankruptcy laws are about. But did you say?
Listen, I'm not talking about your buddy.
No,
I'm
no,
not talking about the intention of not.
I understand. That's what bankruptcy laws were intended for, is that if circumstances arise, you get sick, you get disabled. There are circumstances that have arisen
Right.
that's what bankruptcy laws are for.
But I haven't paid my debt.
That's correct.
So bankruptcy is still, you would consider that a sin.
Bankruptcy is, I think that you can use bankruptcy laws within our society today to protect yourself from destitution, but at the same time, you should still pay that debt back to the best of your ability. Once you're protected from your creditors, that they're not going to come and take the tools of your trade and everything else, you should be working at trying to pay those debts back, even though you've been protected by bankruptcy. Even though the debts have been legally discharged by bankruptcy court, you should be making your effort to pay the debt back.
But
That's
it's forgiven though.
It's
Just like-
forgiven by law. It's forgiven by law, by statute, by Man's law. But you still have, even in the 7, the 7 year where they were supposed to forgive and the debts, those people who borrowed it still had an obligation to try to pay it back. That's clear in borrow. The wicked borrows and does not repay.
Right.
That makes you wicked if you haven't repaid it. You should do your best to repay the debt.
I would say this, Shaq, that if you are in a biblical church and you are hearing biblical teaching,
Right.
and there are biblical people there that are holding you accountable, then if the church is allowing that to happen, where people are making, let's just say it's a bad decision that you're in debt, then where is the teaching coming from the church? Let's say it was a natural disaster or an unexpected emergency, then where is the church's
Benevolence.
benevolence? So there, I would say this, it comes back to the church, it comes back to the leaders of the church, that if those situations are occurring where someone cannot pay it, they have either not done their job in one of two places.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand, but if it were to happen where the church can't, you know what I mean? I mean, if 10 families all are in the same area, they all got, what do they do? What do you do then, And that's, my whole point is, we always, I don't know, we get into debt, and then we, when it suits us sometimes, we'll pay this and this amount of time, this amount of time. Well, if we're gonna prolong how long we can pay our debt because of our circumstances, then I can do the same thing to a credit, I'm saying I can do the same thing with a credit card company, and you can't hold me accountable if I refinance. What if I refinance? Then is that sinful? Because I had first promised them that I was gonna pay it in, let's say I did a 20-year, and then I refinanced, and I was like, well, I'm gonna need 5 more years. Where does this, when I sign a contract,
Thing is, when you refinance, typically you're paying off those people just as you promised, and you're taking a new loan with another company. When you refinance those credit cards, you should be paying them off and getting another loan somewhere else to do it. You're still obligating those. You're not forgetting their
But you're
contract.
prolonging it.
And what we're talking,
You're not with them. You'll be paying them off in full and getting a loan somewhere else.
yeah.
Right, you begin another
Correct,
contract with
yes,
somebody else.
exactly.
There are the technicalities of a contract, and then there is the underlying substance of the transaction.
Of morality.
But it's the difference between form and substance. In substance, a transaction is what was intended. In form is what was written down. The IRS has a lot of forms, and if you fill out the forms correctly, you've met the IRS obligations. But what was the substance of that transaction might be completely something different. When I was in accounting, and there was huge, we talked about form versus substance all the time. Form gives you a safe harbor under statutory law. The substance is what's the reality of this. And we're Christians. We deal in reality. That's what the Bible does. The Bible deals in reality. If you signed a contract, you're talking about the form. The reality of the substance of the transaction is you borrowed some money from somebody, you owe it back.
Right. What if I can't pay it?
The Bible allows for forgiveness. The Bible allows for bankruptcy. The Bible also allowed for debt slavery. It did. It may not be a bad idea. But that's the way that worked, is that you worked for somebody for a period of time to pay back your debt.
Right.
They fed you, they clothed you, they housed you, but you paid back your debt through work, yes.
Yeah, which is the way it should be, because.
It's restitution.
Yeah. In other words, the Bible, the way I understand the Bible is, you're gonna pay it back one way or the other. You're gonna pay it back with cash, or you're gonna pay it back with labor, but you're gonna pay it back. We, of course, have improved things, of course, to make it so that you don't have, if you can work the system, not saying that's what your question is, but if you can work the system, there's ways that you
Absolutely.
don't have to pay it back. And then the debt is paid by the person who lent the money to you.
Somebody else pays the debt.
Yeah, there's always paying.
That's what Ryan was talking about, how real estate companies and construction companies do this all the time.
Yeah, I saw
Yeah.
it.
Well, in that case then, we shouldn't use inflation for our advantage then, because we're actually not paying the debt back. We're actually paying less than we actually borrow. So inflation is just the same as not paying the credit card company their full amount.
In a sense, you were absolutely correct. That's what we were arguing against.
How many people in here were in Marcel Brady's,
I was saying it, but I listened to it.
okay,
Yes.
he's arguing that I pay my employees every 2 weeks.
Yes.
He's arguing that I am illegally
Unbiblically.
money unbiblically, and I am in essence in debt to them.
Yeah, we talked about that in one of the weeks when we talked about that, yes, as an employee, I'm extending a loan to my employer daily. But then it becomes a question of logistics. Do I get paid every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes,
It
every?
says daily.
I know, the Bible says daily, but at what point does, it's,
You're
If everybody-
gonna pay your electric bill daily, your gas bill daily. It's very, very difficult in our society
I
to
argued
settle
that-
obligations every
I
day.
argued that with, me and Martin had an hour and a half conversation, hour maybe, that afternoon, later that evening. And I argued that, and he said, as a Christian, shouldn't we pay it beforehand so that they owe us rather than us owing them?
maybe.
Pay your electric bill.
You can't do that. They just say hang a credit on it. You can do that with your credit card as well. If you overpay, I know you got to go on a 2-month trip, you just overpaid all his bills by 3 times, and when it came back, you still had a credit, you know? You don't have to worry about paying all his bills while he's gone or get someone else to do it.
Yeah.
Easily done,
It can be done.
easily done.
It can be done. It's a question of whether, what's societal custom. But the Bible does argue for paying people daily. At that time, it was, you had occasional day laborers. You didn't have a job per se like you have now. People showed up to work your farm or.
Some showed up at lunchtime, some showed up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Exactly. And you don't ever see them again. And so that's why you pay them daily.
I'm just saying.
I understand.
If we're gonna sit here and say that these things this is how it is, then we have to look at everything.
We do, and
Aren't we, we're trying to talk about principles though, so there's.
This whole thing is about principles.
Yeah,
Of
so
course it is.
there's probably would think about the principle of things as opposed to like the exact, like with John, we're not trying to set up like, this is how you must do it. So there's probably some principles you can talk about in that whole paying labor and stuff like that.
but that's something that we, as businessmen, we could think about, is prepaying our people. We could,
But then they owe us.
when they owe us.
So if it's a Christian laborer, then he doesn't want to owe, he
So this
doesn't
could
wanna
feel
owe
like-
us the-
Right.
Minute by minute transfer.
At the end of the day.
That's why I think that maybe the Bible, the substance of what the Bible was talking about there didn't have to do with the time value of money. It had to do with the fact that in that society, if you didn't pay them that day, you weren't paying them at all.
No, but we say it's so hard to do. Our employees are set up on a bank transfer, on an ACH debit. And we do that daily. Like we cop out and we say, well, that's impractical. To pay my employees every day, I have to be
That's-
there every day they park their car.
Every day that technology improves, it becomes more and more practical.
That's
But, for instance, 10 11 years ago, when I started at Bedrock, they were doing it over back then. Okay? That was a pain in the neck. I mean, we were looking up tables. Okay, how much do I have to take out? You know, it was awful. And, you know, that would have been a mess every day. Today, it's on a payroll service. We can just type it into a computer and the checks would come as frequently as we want. Some of them are checks, some of them are ACH. It's like you said.
I wouldn't want to check every day.
Right. So, I mean, we're talking about details.
Yeah,
Yeah, no question. But it's a detail that the Bible talks about.
right.
Yeah. Let me try to wrap this so we can get off the debt. To borrow done prevent debt, if you borrow, pay back all debt. It talks, here's principle, have a guaranteed rate of payback. This is the collateral idea. Don't take unsecured loans. When you're taking an unsecured loan, you are becoming a surety. That's the technical aspect of it. Most of the time we think of suretyship as signing for someone else, but you can sign for yourself. That's what an unsecured loan is. And if you sign for somebody else, you are being their security, which is, the Bible says you're lacking in sense if you do that. But collateral is the best way to go. Be careful about long term. We talked about that. Here are Calvin's principles on debt. He talked about that no one should take interest from the poor. So he was in favor of the poor loan. The poor loan. Whoever loans should not be so preoccupied with gain as to neglect his necessary duties, or wishing to protect his money, disdain his poor brothers. So in other words, be charitable. Take a look and see what are the circumstances of this person that's coming to you for a loan. Can you charge interest? Can you charge interest? You've got to take that into consideration. No principle should be followed that is not in accord with natural equity. For everything should be examined in the light of Christ's precepts. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This precept is applicable every time. So again, it's that idea. Take into consideration these circumstances. Whoever borrows should make at least as much, if not more, than you not borrow. This gets to a point that you asked about commercial borrowing. Don't borrow for consumption. You're borrowing, according to Calvin, this is commercial, right? You should be making at least as much as the amount you borrowed. So you're borrowing for a productive asset. You're borrowing for your business. You're trying to make something. Are you going to make as much as what you borrowed? Or are you just walking the edge with that? That's a principle that Calvin came up with. Don't determine what's lawful by basing it on common practice or in accordance with the iniquity of the world, but base it on principle derived from the Word of God. In other words, here's where usury in common parlance comes, technically current parlance comes in. Usury is when you're charging too much. Now, if anybody's charging too much, like credit card companies charge 18%, just because they're doing it doesn't mean we should do it. That's what Calvin's saying here. What makes sense? 18% is too much money in today's economy. Doesn't make sense. It's not even though it's common practice, it's iniquitous. Not consider the private advantage of those with whom we deal. Keep in mind what's best for the common good. It's quite obvious that the interest a merchant pays is a public fee. So Calvin sees commercial lending as a common good. It's for the good of society. It's to release the society and kind of grease the wheels so that people aren't paralyzed because they can't have any debts. That's what we're talking about with extending loans to our employees, or our employees extending us a loan for a week at a time. It's what we do when we borrow money from the electric company for a month at a time. It greases the wheels. Keep in mind that the common good is in view here. That's what we're talking about. Let me go back to this one other thing. The contract should benefit rather than hurt. So you wouldn't lend money to somebody to put up a strip club, right? Even though you could make good interest at it. That's not for the common good. That'd be a bad use of credit. Interesting is Calvin thought that a country's public laws were legitimate to say you can only charge this much interest. I'm not so sure about that, but that was Calvin's view, that you should be in accord with your country's laws. So I know we blew through those quickly. And any questions about those? And we're also way over time.
I have a question
So-
for Chad. You said you want to be paid daily. Why is that?
It's inconvenient for me, if I got paid in checks, it's inconvenient to have,
Okay,
I'd rather have one at the end of the week.
just, okay.
Just because of the inconvenience, nothing else. But if it was a direct deposit,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't, no, I wouldn't care. I would take it every day.
Just shows up.
Yeah, if it just showed up in my, I'm not set up that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting is that it's not, the tax code's not even set up that way.
Yeah.
The tax calculations don't work very well on a daily basis. They're set up for weeklies, every 2 weeks, bi-weeklies, semi-monthly, monthly. You know, they don't have it figured out how to do the taxes if you're paying somebody every day. I mean, with computers, obviously, you can do it, but their tables just aren't set up for, they consider that occasional. Yes.
Sorry,
No, that's all right. That's why we're here.
with the mortgage thing, which is using, inflation to your advantage.
Yep.
If a bank would say, well, listen, we're gonna raise your rates according to inflation, you pay $1,000 a month, with inflation being whatever, we're gonna,
And put an inflation clause in it. Yeah.
so you would revert to the contract. You would revert to the contract and say, I signed a contract with you. You didn't put that in the contract, and that's why I'm gonna pay you what we agreed on the contract and nothing more, even though I know that I'm paying you at the end of the day, you're actually getting paid less and less, and I'm not paying you,
Right.
So you would go back to the contract and use the contract for your advantage. Knowing that when you sign the contract, what you're doing.
That
You
would,
don't know that. You don't know what inflation's gonna do, you could have opposite inflation.
You have a good idea.
Yeah.
Your intention, so what is your intention when you first,
exactly, and that was my point when we talked about it, is are you going into that contract with the intention of
and
assuming?
most of us assume that inflation is gonna be on our side.
See, we go into this contract looking for a place to buy, not thinking, how can I screw the bank? I just don't see anybody doing that. When I'm looking at buying a property, I'm not thinking, how can I take it to a bank? I'm thinking, what does my family need?
That's all,
I don't even think inflation is even in the slightest concept.
I don't know, some people use it for their advantage, some people.
I never took it into account.
I always look at it, I look at it from a commercial loan, I look at it as, if I loan $100,000 now, and I have 5 years to pay it back, the price of my product is gonna go up, but their loan is set in stone, so in the end, I would hope that I could pay it off in 4 years, or a year or so less, depending on inflation. It's not that I consider that as, like, that's the only way I'm gonna take a loan, but I always look at it that if you base it off of projected and based on inflation, what they have created, I come out, I end up, there's an advantage there. Not that it affects me on the decision.
So if a bank would come to you and say, listen, with inflation, we're gonna play it both sides. If it's
Well, if that's in the contract, I would probably think twice, but they can't do that once you sign the contract.
right, and that's what I'm saying. We can revert to the contract when we want to.
The question ends up
We
being,
revert to the contract when we want to.
Meaning, if the bank came and said, listen, man, let's be honest, inflation is going up, they keep raising inflation. We gotta bump up your payments, man. Like, we gotta bump them up a little bit to go with inflation. And listen, if it deflates again, man, we're gonna start, you would not agree to pay them more.
But that's a contract that you've made up in.
Yes.
So if we have deflation instead of inflation, then I am suffering.
So
But
it's
again,
not about if
to
you're gonna
John-
pay the debt, it's about the contract.
So in the end,
That's what it is.
as John has said, it ends up being about the principle of what you're doing.
Yeah. And they're using a principle, which is, we're getting hosed here. Inflation is hosed.
That's what he's saying, is if you were really gonna
But they're
go by
not-
the principle of paying back exactly what you borrowed, you would say, hey, that's absolutely adjusted.
Yeah, you would actually go to the bank and pay them more and say, listen, because of inflation, I gotta pay you more. That's my debt to you is with
That's not a
inflation.
contract.
That's your point.
That's my
The
point.
thing is, I don't buy that you don't have to pay a credit card company in the contract. I just don't see it.
People have done it.
Yeah, they can get it approved by law, but that is not the intent. The intent of the scenario is, I'm gonna lend you money, you're gonna pay it back 18%, you're gonna pay it all eventually. Same thing with the mortgage, you know, lend you money, here's the intent.